Jackson Wells had lived on the same land since he was 5. Long before the neighborhood had gates, bylaws, or board meetings, his grandfather had planted the angel oak in the center of the property. It stretched skyward with slow, sprawling, grace-wide arms draped with moss, roots gripping the soil like a buried cathedral. People came from other towns just to see it. The county listed it as a protected landmark. When Jackson inherited the house, he restored every inch except the tree that he left untouched. He kept the lawn short, built a new porch, and installed solar panels with permits in triplicate. Still, he knew he didn't fit the picture painted by the new HOA president. Karen Delacroix. Karen had only lived on the block for 6 months before she began rearranging it. She showed up to every door with pamphlets about fence uniformity and mailbox repainting. She brought cookies. She spoke in a voice like gentle rain, but her eyes always measured things. The oak tree didn't match her vision of a manicured neighborhood. The first letter arrived folded in thirds, stamped with an HOA emblem at the top. It cited neighborhood consistency and suggested Jackson consider trimming or replacing obstructive foliage. He laughed out loud at first. He even pinned the letter to the fridge like a joke, but 3 days later, he found a second letter in his mailbox, this one firmer. He decided to attend the next board meeting. He brought pictures of the tree's protected status, a letter from the city arborist, and documents showing the tree's historical value. Karen looked at the papers, then looked at him as if she hadn't expected resistance. The bylaws allow the HOA to make requests if an element affects neighboring aesthetics, she said, folding her hands. Jackson didn't blink. This tree's been here since your house was a dairy barn. Someone at the table coughed into their hand to hide a laugh. Karen's mouth tightened. The subject was tabled for later review, but Jackson could feel it wasn't over. That weekend he noticed a white SUV slow roll past his property 3 times. He recognized it from the HOA newsletter, Karen's vehicle. She didn't get out, just watched. He shut his gate. The third letter came with a fine. He refused to pay. The fourth one came nailed directly to the tree itself. Jackson pulled the notice from the bark slowly. The nail had been driven deep, leaving a bleeding crescent in the wood. He looked up at the limbs stretching overhead, swaying lightly in the breeze, unaware of the drama below. For the first time, something knotted in his stomach. That evening he sat on his porch, the paper beside him, the wound in the trunk visible from his chair. The sun was setting behind the oak, spilling gold through its branches. He reached for his phone and ordered two motion-detecting cameras. As he entered his house, he glanced back once more. A car turned the corner at the end of the block and slowed as it passed his fence. Karen sat in the driver's seat, lit by the fading orange light. She didn't wave. The next morning, Jackson found fresh footprints in the soft dirt near the tree. He didn't say anything to the neighbors, not yet, but he started locking the side gate. Jackson woke before dawn to the low growl of distant thunder. It hadn't rained yet, but the wind had shifted, the kind of wind that made the leaves whisper warnings. He stepped out with his coffee, standing beneath the porch awning, eyes on the oak. The fresh footprints from the day before had been half-effaced by the breeze, but the gouge in the bark remained. His cameras had arrived that morning. He'd wasted no time installing them, one facing the trunk, the other covering the side fence where the soil had been disturbed. They weren't flashy, just enough to catch motion and send alerts. He didn't want confrontation. He wanted proof. The HOA newsletter arrived folded inside a clear sleeve, slipped between his fence boards like a threat. Jackson opened it with tired hands. On the third page, beneath a paragraph about seasonal decor restrictions, was a new policy draft, titled Natural Obstructions and Community Uniformity. It was written in Karen's careful language. All suggestions and civility, but he knew what it was meant for. He dropped it on the kitchen counter without finishing. That evening, Jackson walked the yard slowly, inspecting the tree again. Small strands of twine had been wrapped around one of the lower limbs, harmless to an untrained eye, but the tension they applied could damage the branch over time. He took photos, carefully removed them, and checked the camera feed. The time-stamped clip showed someone entering from the side gate just after midnight. The hooded figure moved quickly, no flashlight, head ducked. Jackson paused the video and leaned closer. The person's frame was small, posture familiar, though the face never turned toward the camera. The shape of the jaw and the swing of the arm jogged a memory. Karen, waving at the last HOA picnic with that same stiff motion, forwarded the footage to his attorney with no comment. 2 nights later, the wind returned stronger. Jackson was upstairs when he heard a faint metallic rattle near the side yard. Not loud enough to wake most people, but enough for him. He didn't turn on any lights, slipped on his boots, grabbed his phone, and moved through the back door like a shadow. He stepped into darkness, listening. The gate wasn't swinging, but something had disturbed the trash bin beside it. He inched closer. A shoe print in the soft dirt near the base of the tree caught his eye. The camera pinged a notification. He opened the feed on his phone. Real-time playback showed nothing. He checked the earlier clips. At 2:14 a.m., the hooded figure had returned. This time, they held something long and metallic in one hand. The movement was slower, more methodical. A chainsaw. Not roaring, not yet. Just being tested for weight. Jackson's chest tightened as he watched the person pace around the tree, then vanish from the camera's edge. He called no one. Not yet. Instead, he saved the footage twice. Once to the cloud, once to an external drive. He printed still images and placed them in a folder labeled quietly with the word insurance. Then he sat in the kitchen and stared out the window. Watching the wind pull at the leaves, the tree swayed, unaware of the threat, but Jackson was no longer asleep to it. The rain came in pulses, not a storm, just a steady tapping on the windows that kept the world quiet. Jackson moved through the house without sound, lights dimmed low, eyes scanning the backyard through the mist. The tree stood still, but something about it felt ... tired. He stepped out under the awning and let the air hit him, damp, metallic, full of warnings. He checked the cameras again. At 2:14 a.m., the same hooded figure had returned. The same shuffle, same crouch. This time, the chainsaw was running, not at full power, but humming. In the clip, the figure kneeled near the base of the oak and pressed the blade against the bark. The camera picked up the motion. Slow, surgical cuts near a main root cluster. Not enough to fell the tree at once, just enough to weaken it. Jackson paused the footage, his knuckles tightened around the phone. It didn't make sense. No homeowner in their right mind would do this in secret, but he'd seen that posture before, in how Karen leaned over potted plants at the HOA garden showcase, inspecting for imperfections. That same tilt, that same tension in the neck. He copied the footage to another drive and printed new stills. One of them caught the chainsaw's brand in partial view. It matched a model sold at the hardware store down the road. By midday, the bark near the base of the oak had started to fray. Jackson didn't touch it. He took pictures, added them to the file. Then he called the county arborist and asked for an emergency inspection. The man showed up that afternoon in a gray windbreaker, walked the yard in silence, and crouched low at the trunk dot. After several minutes, he stood and dusted off his hands. "This isn't natural decay," he said. "Somebody's been cutting it over multiple days. Whoever it is knows what they're doing." Jackson said nothing. "Want me to file an official report?" the man asked. "Not yet," Jackson replied. "But I need a written evaluation." He nodded. "You've got a case here. This is protected land." By evening, Jackson posted the footage on a private neighborhood forum under an anonymous account. No caption, no accusation, just the clip and a date. The reactions came quickly. "Would do that? Looks like someone's got a grudge. Is that Karen's property line? Wait, is that her?" No one mentioned names outright, but the silence around one particular address spoke louder than anything. Karen didn't reply in the thread. She didn't have to. The next morning, a city maintenance truck parked outside his gate. A clipboard man asked to take photographs for a preservation review. He'd seen the forum post. Word was spreading. That night, Jackson sat in the living room, lights off, watching headlights drift through rain-streaked windows. A white SUV crawled past at half speed, paused, then continued down the road. He didn't move. The oak tree shifted. In the wind again, but now it leaned ever so slightly to the left, toward the fence, toward the driveway where his neighbor's car often sat half on his gravel. A fracture had begun near the wounded base. Running through the bark like a fault line, he reached for the folder of stills and slid in the newest printout. The chainsaw teeth had left their mark. It was no longer a question of if the tree would fall, only when Dot and Jackson knew someone else was starting to worry about that too. The day began quiet. No wind, no rain, just a humid stillness that clung to everything. Jackson stood by the kitchen window, watching condensation form on the glass. The tree outside seemed frozen in place. Not peaceful. Evans no longer stretched confidently across the yard, but hung heavier than before, weighed down by what had been done in the dark. He walked out to check the base. The split had deepened. The roots on one side were starting to pull free from the earth. It looked like the ground was exhaling. He didn't touch it. He just stood there, taking photos, aware that the next time he looked at this spot, everything might be different. Across the street, Karen's white SUV gleamed in the sunlight. As usual, it was parked on the edge of his property line, just far enough into his gravel to trigger annoyance. She was nowhere in sight, but he could feel her presence behind one of those pristine windows. Watching, waiting, calculating. By afternoon, clouds returned. Not a storm yet, just gray pressure above the neighborhood. At 5:17 p.m., Jackson received another alert from the camera facing the tree. But it wasn't motion this time, it was angled drift. The camera had tilted. Something had shifted the tree. He stepped onto the porch just as the first wind gust hit. A soft creak echoed through the air like a groan. Jackson stared. The topmost branches swayed hard left, and the trunk moved just slightly with them. He turned to look at the driveway. Karen's SUV was still there, unmoved since morning. It sat angled awkwardly, one tire nearly over the concrete lip of his driveway. Its hood pointed directly at the tree. Jackson's mind connected things before he fully realized what he was thinking. He didn't run. He didn't call out. He just stepped back and waited. Another gust. Louder, creaking. The tree was no longer upright. It leaned forward, then corrected, like a giant struggling to stay balanced. At 5:26 p.m., the sound changed. A crack, sudden and violent. ripped through the air like a rifle shot. Jackson didn't flinch. The oak let go in stages first, the topmost limbs, snapping mid-sway, then the heavy middle canopy, pulling downward like a sail catching wind. The guy's trunk followed a heartbeat later, splitting at the wound where the chainsaw had torn it days before. The collapse was slow, almost deliberate, as if the tree chose where to fall. Karen's SUV took the full weight of the impact. The windshield exploded inward, the roof caved, alarms screaming uselessly beneath the crushing timber. Bark, leaves, and glass scattered across the drive. The silence that followed was brief. Doors opened down the block. Neighbors stepped outside, drawn by the noise. Jackson remained on the porch, unmoved. Karen came running seconds later. She was barefoot, robe flapping behind her, phone already pressed to her ear. Her mouth moved rapidly, her other hand pointing wildly at Jackson, at the tree, at the ruin of her vehicle. She didn't come closer, not with so many eyes on them. An hour later, police cars rolled in. One officer approached Jackson calmly and asked for his account. Jackson handed over a flash drive without a word. He didn't need to explain anything. The tree had spoken louder than he ever could. The flash drive was still in the officer's hand when Karen began yelling again. From the far edge of the driveway, she pointed at Jackson's porch like it was the site of a crime scene. Her car, mangled and half swallowed by the oak's upper limbs, steamed quietly behind her. Her words came in a rush, layered with panic and practiced outrage harassment. Property damage, negligence. Jackson didn't respond. He kept his arms crossed as the officer took down his statement, only speaking when asked direct questions. Yes, the tree had been inspected by a city arborist. Yes, he had received threats. Yes, there were security cameras. No, he hadn't touched the tree. When the officer asked if he had any reason to believe someone had tampered with it, Jackson simply nodded toward the flash drive. The tow truck arrived, but the driver hesitated before attempting to move anything. The tree's limbs had collapsed in such a way that parts of the vehicle were pinned deep beneath twisted roots. A second truck was called. It took over 2 hours to clear the scene. During that time, Karen paced her lawn, made several phone calls, and never once looked at Jackson again. By morning, he received a notice from the HOA, formal complaint for negligent landscaping, a threat of further fines, and a request to appear at a hearing. He expected it. He had the whole letter scanned and filed within 10 minutes. Later that week, his own lawyer filed a lawsuit, destruction of a protected tree, trespassing, and property damage. The city had already opened an investigation, and the arborist's written report detailed clear evidence of sabotage. Combined with the video evidence and stills, the foundation was set. Then came Karen's counter-lawsuit. The documents landed on Jackson's doorstep in a thick envelope. The claims were broad: emotional distress, targeted harassment, character defamation, and a demand for full replacement value of the destroyed BMW. Her name filled every page like a signature written in anger. His lawyer read through it without speaking. Then he pulled a pen from his coat pocket, circled 3 sections quietly, and set the packet aside. She filed fast, he said. That tells me she's scared. What's the plan? Jackson asked. Same as it's always been, let her hang herself with her own rope. The discovery phase began 2 weeks later. Subpoenas were issued. Every board email, every HOA fine, every camera clip and forum post entered the record. Jackson watched from the sidelines as it all moved forward. Meanwhile, the neighbors began talking. Not openly, not in public, but in nods, in changed tones. More than a few residents knocked on Jackson's door. Some just to say they saw what happened, others to ask if he needed anything. One woman quietly handed him a copy of an old HOA newsletter, the one Karen had edited with a section about unapproved trees that now read more like a warning than policy. Karen, for her part, remained on edge. Her SUV was gone, towed off the lot in silence. Her once perfect yard started to wilt, plants overwatered or left to dry out. She stopped walking the block. She skipped the next board meeting. A new signature appeared at the bottom of HOA notices. Something had shifted, but Jackson knew it wasn't over. Not yet. This was just the edge of the page. The real chapter would be written. Under courtroom lights, Jackson sat in the conference room, staring at a folder thick with printouts. His attorney tapped through pages methodically, pausing only to highlight phrases in yellow. On the far end of the table, the HOA's official response team sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact. Karen wasn't present. Her lawyer was. Discovery had begun to pull threads loose. Among the documents turned over was the HOA's quarterly budget, a carefully worded spreadsheet of fees, penalties, landscaping costs, and reserve allocations. At first glance, it looked ordinary, but Jackson's lawyer had a habit of reading between the lines. There, he said, turning the page toward Jackson, line item 39, emergency landscape expenditure, amount $1,800. What about it? Jackson asked. There's no invoice, no approval minutes, but we traced the payout. He flipped to the next page. Attached was a bank statement and a check copy endorsed to a local contractor. Jackson leaned closer. The name matched one he hadn't seen in years. Until recently, the same guy who sold her that chainsaw, his lawyer said. The connection wasn't declared, wasn't itemized. No receipts, no contracts. Just a quiet outflow of funds to a man, known for off-the-books, yard work. She paid him to weaken the tree, Jackson said. Not directly, his lawyer replied, but the trail is enough, especially when combined with the footage. They'd already synchronized the timestamps. The camera clip showed the figure entering the yard with the chainsaw. 2 days later, the check cleared the HOA account. 3 days after that, the tree fell. Across town, a retired board member agreed to meet. Jackson didn't know the man well. Mr. Winslow, elderly, always quiet at meetings, but he had resigned shortly after Karen took over as HOA president. Now, he sat across from Jackson at a diner booth, stirring tea and avoiding eye contact. She pushed us, he said, barely above a whisper. Wanted to rewrite the rules. Most of us voted no. She said she'd find a way anyway. Did she? Mentioned the tree. Winslow hesitated, then nodded once. Said it ruined the line of sight from her upstairs office. Called it visually hostile. Thought it was arrogant. She asked if the board would approve funding for a quiet removal. Quiet, discreet? She said. No trucks, no permits. Just make it disappear. Jackson sat still, letting the words settle. Winslow reached into his coat and slid a folded paper across the table, an old printed email chain. Karen's name was at the top. The date matched the week of the chainsaw footage. Jackson left without finishing his coffee. At home, he placed the email into the folder, alongside the footage, the invoice trail, and the arborist's report. Each piece no longer felt like a clue. Now it felt like a story with its ending creeping closer. Later that evening, another envelope slid under his door. This one wasn't from the HOA, it was hand-delivered. Inside was a letter from Karen's attorney requesting mediation. She wanted to settle. Jackson didn't answer. He turned the lights off, stepped out onto the porch, and looked at the empty space where the tree once stood. The soil had shifted. The grass was starting to grow over the roots. Across the street, Karen's windows remained dark. For the first time, the street felt quiet in a way that didn't press down on him. But Jackson wasn't finished. Not yet. Some things had to be said out loud in front of witnesses, under oath. The courthouse was colder than expected. Fluorescent lights buzzed above worn wood benches as people filed in quietly, coats tucked under arms, whispers trailing behind them. Jackson sat at the plaintiff's table, his lawyer arranging folders in tight rows, each labeled, each color. Across the aisle, Karen sat with arms crossed, face carefully blank. She wore gray instead of her usual sharp whites and pastels. Her lawyer leaned in every few minutes to whisper something, but she rarely responded. Her eyes stayed fixed ahead, though never on Jackson. The judge entered, and everyone rose. Jackson had never been in court before, not like this. But the moment the first piece of evidence was introduced, the weight in the room shifted. His lawyer began with the footage, the silent entry through the side gate, the crouched figure with the chainsaw, the timestamp matching the HOA's unrecorded landscaping expense. The grainy footage flickered on the courtroom screen, still and damning. Karen's attorney objected, said the footage was inconclusive, said the figure's identity couldn't be proven, said it was all circumstantial. But then the invoice appeared. The check, signed from the HOA account, the contractor's name, his statement, submitted via affidavit, confessing to being pressured for a quick off-the-books job. No formal documentation, no written work order, just a verbal promise and cash. Next came the email from the retired board member, printed and signed. Karen's phrasing echoed like a quiet whisper in the courtroom. Remove the obstruction. No trucks, no permits. Quiet. Jackson didn't need to speak. The evidence did the talking. Karen's defense tried to pivot. Her lawyer claimed harassment, mental strain, emotional distress. They cited neighborhood gossip, the viral forum clip, and Jackson's lawsuit as targeted retaliation. But the judge leaned forward. You authorized funds from the HOA account without approval. You denied involvement despite multiple records suggesting otherwise, and now you're claiming to be the injured party. Karen's mouth opened, but her lawyer touched her arm. She said nothing. The judge continued. There's enough here to justify damages, and enough, frankly, for a criminal referral. But that's outside this courtroom scope. Karen finally looked up, not at the judge, not at her lawyer, but across the aisle. Her gaze met Jackson's for the first time since the tree had fallen. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even fear. It was resignation. The ruling came. Minutes later, full liability assigned to Karen Delacroix for the destruction of protected property and trespassing. A formal injunction issued to prevent her from approaching Jackson's land, financial damages to be calculated in a separate hearing. Karen stood slowly, as if each movement required effort. Her lawyer gathered the papers without speaking. As she turned to leave, she stopped beside the plaintiff's table. Just for a second. I didn't mean for it to go that far, she muttered. Jackson didn't respond. He didn't need to. Outside, the air was dry and still. Reporters had gathered, tipped off by the rumors of HOA, misconduct, and viral video. Jackson pushed through them without speaking. He didn't want a spotlight. He just wanted to go home. When he pulled onto his street, everything felt quieter. Even the air around the space where the oak once stood felt different, less broken, more settled. But this wasn't closure. Not yet. One final hearing remained. One last statement to be made. Not in anger, not in revenge, just in truth. Because stories like this don't end in silence. The hearing for damages lasted less than an hour. Jackson didn't speak once. His lawyer laid everything out. The arborist's valuation of the tree, the historical documents proving its protected status, the legal costs, the surveillance equipment, and the loss of privacy. Karen sat with her hands clasped, jaw tight, eyes on the table. The judge reviewed everything without comment. When he finally spoke, the number he cited was lower than expected, but still enough to feel like a weight. Karen flinched when she heard it. The courtroom emptied quietly. Jackson signed the final documents, declined comment to a reporter standing by the elevator, and walked out without looking back. It was done, but endings rarely arrive with ceremony. A week later, a crew arrived at his property not from the city, but from a volunteer group. Word had spread through local forums. People remembered the tree. Some even had pictures from years back. Children climbing its limbs, graduates taking portraits beneath its leaves. Without asking for permission, they began to clear the fallen roots respectfully. Jackson stepped outside to stop them, but paused when he saw the care they were using. One man gently placed a small piece of bark into a basket like it was a relic. He let them continue. By sunset, the space was clean. Not empty, but clean. The crater where the tree had fallen had been smoothed and filled. One of the volunteers had brought a wooden sign. It read, Wells Grove, in memory of what stood, in defiance of what tried to erase it. Jackson didn't say much, just nodded once and went inside. Karen's house went up for sale the following week. The sign was modest, but no one touched it. The grass grew longer. The porch lights never came on. Some neighbors said she'd moved into an apartment near the courthouse. Others claimed she was trying to file for bankruptcy to avoid paying the damages. Jackson didn't care either way. One morning, he found an envelope slid under his front door. No name, just folded paper. Inside was a note written in clean, cautious handwriting. I was wrong. I thought I could shape the neighborhood to fit me. I tried to control things I didn't understand. The tree didn't deserve what happened, and neither did you. I've left. I won't be back. I hope one day something good grows there again. No signature. But the message was clear. Jackson folded the note carefully and added it to the file he had stored away. He didn't do it out of sentiment. He did it because stories matter, even the ones that end in silence. That spring, something sprouted from the center of the clearing, not planted by Jackson, not by any crew. Just a thin green stem rising stubbornly through the dirt. He didn't touch it. He didn't call anyone. It just watched it grow. By summer, it had taken shape. Young leaves, familiar patterns. Not the same tree, but something close. One evening, he stood beside it and realized what had truly been left behind. Something stronger than branches or bark. A line drawn not in roots, but in choices. In standing still when everything around tried to bend or break. And across the street, the porch lights still stayed off. The house waited, empty. Some stories ended with courtrooms, others with quiet growth. But his ended right here where the tree had fallen, and something new refused to stop rising.